This letter was a response by me to Nancy Pelosi's conversation with Bill Maher, and that we need a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. Whoa. Don't clap yet. Samantha will read the letter, and as she reads the letter, I hope to demonstrate a little different approach to that. Okay?
This is a performance piece by Reverend Dr. Gregory Van Wilson. A letter to Nancy Pelosi, House Minority Leader. Madam Speaker Pelosi, Nancy Patricia D'Alessandro Pelosi, it is a privilege and a blessing to be alive in a time when a woman has become one of the most powerful people in our nation. Your life's work and dedication to our nation has brought you to serve as Speaker of the House and presently Minority Leader of the United States House of Representatives. I hope and pray one day I will see a woman as President of the United States of America. Your service to our nation has brought a certain awareness of the possibility of legislative compassion and has helped open the pathway for women to become leaders in our nation. When a young girl sits down with her mother and watches the house in action, she sees you sitting up front and says, "One day I can be there." I'm grateful for your service. In January of 2013, in an appearance on the Bill Maher show, you spoke of your concern about the Supreme Court decision, Citizens United versus the FEC. I and many others, including the President, take issue with this decision and the damaging effects it has had and will continue to have on our democracy, both nationally and locally. For starters, nowhere in the land will an election be safe from the interests and considerable clout of corporations and possibly other governments. So, for example, China could manipulate an election of a local U.S. sheriff. This has gone too far. And your solution of having a constitutional amendment to overturn the ruling of Citizens United, although valid, does not go far enough to rectify the situation. In a word, it would not address the wound made to our democracy by granting corporations the same Bill of Rights protection that were designed for humans only. When the founders of our nation began to organize and discuss the idea of forming a country in which we, the people, would have meaning, they were expressing thoughts that had been birthing for over 1,000 years. As far back in time as the Persian Empire, citizens enjoyed some degree of freedom. People of all religions and ethnic groups were given the same rights and had the same freedom of religion. Women had the same rights as men, and slavery was abolished, parenthesis, 550 BCE, close parenthesis. These ideas can be seen to surface in Western history at various times. In Poland in the 15th century, the Socinians promoted defense of social equality. They spoke out against the encirclement of peasants. They were the first to postulate the complete separation of church and state, and they also spoke about the ideas and practices of religious freedom, freedom of assembly, and freedom of conscience. The English Bill of Rights in 1689 is a forerunner to our Bill of Rights. All the ideas about human liberty coming together in the minds of the founders of our nation are expressed in the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, and the Anti-Federalist Papers. These ideas, like seeds, birthed the liberty tree of our great nation and inspired oppressed peoples around the globe and throughout history. In the roots of this tree are the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the social contract of all citizens, the expression of natural rights as members of this beautiful living system of the earth, These roots nurture a government with a structured balance of powers. These roots are also strong enough to hold the tension between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, as well as that between the executive branch, the Congress, and the judiciary, none ruling over the other. This balance is what was represented by the signing of the Constitution in 1789 and the promised Bill of Rights in 1791. Madam Speaker, this indeed was a bright light in the history of humankind. However, this balance is one that must be maintained with vigilance. And the scales began to tip as early as 1803, at least in the heart of Thomas Jefferson. Supreme Court decisions through time have been the means in which this balance has been usurped by the very powers that were defeated in 1776.
In 1803, Supreme Court Justice John Marshall, a bitter enemy of Thomas Jefferson, proclaimed that the Supreme Court had the final say according to the law being justified by the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson said, this disrupts the balance of power and enables the judiciary to mold the executive branch and the congressional branch like wax. The first chain in our democracy. In 1819, same Justice Marshall ruled on a case between the people of New Hampshire and the governor of New Hampshire, saying that they wanted to turn Dartmouth College into a public college. But Dartmouth College had a charter signed by King George in 1757. So the people of New Hampshire said, a charter signed by King George in 1757, wasn't that what the Revolutionary War was about? So Justice Marshall said, no, and we are going to honor that decision, that charter between King George and the Board of Dartmouth as valid, and the people of New Hampshire lost. That introduced incorporation into the federal jurisdiction. Before that, it was under the state jurisdiction. The reason I put 1868 up here is that in that Supreme Court decision, they ruled that the Constitution in no way, no shape, no way, no how would call a corporation a person. We call a corporation a person based on the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. The closest Supreme Court decision to the passing of those amendments in 1868 said, no, corporations are not persons and not to be persons under the law. So I put that one way out there because they don't pay much attention to that decision as far as precedence goes. In 1886, there was a Supreme Court decision that said, we are not going to rule on corporations being persons because we already know that they are. The Supreme Court has never ruled whether corporations are persons or not. Off of the footnotes, and if you can find this in Tom Hartman's book, off of the footnotes, they had that decision, we conclude that corporations are persons, but the Supreme Court never voted on that. Between, and you can see this in the notes in your handout, between the years 1890 and 1905, no, 1905 and 1930, over 200 congressional regulations concerning our economic system were overturned by the Supreme Court because corporations has the rights as persons. The Constitution requires Congress to regulate commerce. Commerce under the guise of corporations got Bill of Rights protection against congressional oversight. So how can Congress regulate corporations if they have Bill of Rights protection? As a matter of fact, OSHA went to inspect the grounds of a corporation for safety, and that corporation said, because we are a citizen, you have to get a warrant to come in and inspect our grounds, because they're citizens, they're persons. In 1976, the Supreme Court said that corporations are not only persons, but they said that money equals speech. Money equals speech. Okay. And I'm saying each of these Supreme Court decisions begin to chain our democracy. In 2010, the decision of Citizens United, which allowed being money equal to speech, which allowed corporations to flood our political processes, and many of us know the difficulties that that has caused. Now, the reason I use this gold chain, because there's a lot of money involved in this situation, but I do want you to notice this gold chain sticks to magnets. So, gold it is not. Speaker Pelosi, and so what I'm doing with this is surrounding our democracy with the toxicity of corporate personhood. So we are choking and in chains. So when Speaker Pelosi says, let's remove the 2010 decision, we are still in chains. We're still surrounded by the toxicity. And as I said earlier in the introduction, if you don't change the container of the legal system, 10 years from now, 50 years from now, it comes back to exactly the same that it was. If we just remove Citizens United, it will come back to the way it was. That's the way that animal works. So what we need to do is we need to remove this by its roots, and the only way to do that is remove the Bill of Rights protections from corporations, and that human beings are the only ones that get rights.
Okay, there's a little more to the letter.
We're almost done.
As you can see from the attached list of court cases, which you just saw a much more colorful version of, Madam Speaker, there has been a concerted effort for over a century by a particular part of the business community to centralize economic power in their own interests. Our democracy is threatened, and we are fighting back from the heart of our nation, not from Washington, from all over this land. Corporations with Bill of Rights protection have fouled our air, land, water, food, bodies, communities, spirits, and minds. We, the people, must now ask permission to inspect operations that we know are unsafe for workers and which send poison out into our living spaces. See Hale versus Henkel, 1906, See versus City of Seattle, 1967, and Marshall versus Barlow, 1978. The legalization of the poisoning of our land, air, water, and bodies is the outcome of this usurpation. Simply removing the odious decision of Citizens United will leave our sweet land of liberty in chains and surrounded by the toxicity of tyranny. I strongly urge you to support the move to amend's proposal as follows. We, the people of the United States of America, reject the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in Citizens United and other related cases and move to amend our Constitution to firmly establish that money is not speech and that human beings, not corporations, are persons entitled to constitutional rights. Then we can begin to slowly return our great nation to its healthy foundations. We need leaders such as yourself to champion the march to restore our liberties and Constitution to the intent and meaning of the founders. If anyone or any group wants change in the law of the land, let them do so by constitutional procedures, which we have done already 27 times in our history. Backroom deals, bribes, manipulation, and false promises that cannot be delivered are unacceptable means to accomplish change in the law. This is the way the founders envisioned changes in our Constitution. Thanking you for your thoughtful consideration, the Reverend Dr. Gregory Van Wilson.